Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Just Three Brothers podcast. Today I have Katlin and Carter with me. This is Dallas, as you know. You can follow me on Twitch at Hulkbusters88 and YouTube is the same. Today we're going to be talking about another Nintendo special franchise to us, and that is Zelda. All the way from the original Ocarina of Time, all the way to the Breath of the Wild. And this is super fun for us. We love Link, we love Zelda, and we've loved what Nintendo has been able to do with this character. So we're just going to jump right into it. Let's get it.
I think we can go even earlier than Ocarina of Time. I think there's a lot of really heavy hitters from the Super Nintendo, and even as early as the NES. I think that these are great games. They were so different from any kind of other fantasy game at the time, for sure. Um, Zelda and Link and just the world of Hyrule was so different than anything we were able to really witness at that time. And something that really stood out for me, especially when it got me hooked in the earlier ones, is just how large the inventory was and how many different ways you could approach the game. The first game in the Zelda series was, that much wasn't even really that explained. You didn't even really know who your character was. You kind of were just, it was open world and you were thrown right into it. It didn't really hold your hand. It was kind of, as far as finding some of the secrets as well, was really difficult. But I think that even in the rudimentary stages, I think that these games were really good, and they just kept getting better and better as time went on.
I'm not gonna lie. Zelda's one of my favorite games that has ever literally been in existence. I think it was A Link to the Past, or was it Link's Awakening? I don't know which one was first, but I liked the over the top style of that game. They even recently brought it back for the Nintendo Switch. I think that was Link's Awakening that they revamped, and it was just well done. It was fun. It wasn't clunky. Um, and the thing I liked about that game is like you had a set way to go, but you could also go off and kind of do your own thing with to an extent. And I think it's always fun to be able to kind of play at your own style and play at your own pace and kind of do what you want in the game. If you wanted to just go slice grass and just farm, 999 rupees like I did when I was a kid, then that's what you do, right? So I just think there's lots of avenues for a lot of fun in those type of games. And obviously the inventory being so large in the older games is wonderful.
Yeah, so I never was too crazy invested into the first two Zelda games. I know you had the original one on the NES where you're kind of just dropped into this world. You find some old guy in a cave and he tells you it's dangerous to go alone, take this. And then you're kind of just thrown into this world where you're killing little things that shoot pebbles at you and things like that. And then you have the second game where it completely took a different turn. I think they were still kind of find their stride with what they wanted to do with the Zelda franchise, where that one was kind of more of a 2D kind of Castlevania type game.
It was the only one of its kind, actually. I don't think Zelda has ever done another 2D scroller, and it was surprisingly good. I think that how you mentioned before Castlevania, those are some of my favorite games of all time. But it didn't really hit the mark for me. I know that the second one definitely has its fan base for sure. But I think Castlevania did that kind of routing through castles and that sort of thing in a 2D scrolling environment a lot better than the second Zelda. But it was really nice to see they come back to their grassroots with the top down Zelda one with when he had purple hair. I really like that one as well.
That was Link to the Past, I believe.
Link to the Past, yep.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I haven't played that game much either. It was once it kind of made the transition to the 3D games is when I started really getting into the series with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which are arguably some would say that Ocarina of Time is the best game of all time. I know there's plenty of people who have that opinion, and it's not hard to see why. It's one of the best linear story games of all time. You have Link, he starts off in the forest and eventually progresses to become an adult with white pants, and then he's taking on Ganon, and I just love the story in that game. And even Majora's Mask was just so different. They had such a, we talked about in the last episode how Nintendo never really has these time crunch kind of scenarios, but even when they do, which Majora's Mask, they had a certain amount of time to do that game just before the N64 before the GameCube came out, they needed to release some games on Nintendo 64, and Majora's Mask was one of the final games to be released on that console. And I think even with a strict time crunch, they were able to do such a good job with that game, even though, there may not have been as many locations or dungeons or things like that, but just the fact that they were able to make such an amazing game in such a short amount of time was really a testament to just how incredible Nintendo is.
I think that their time cycle for Majora's Mask was 8 months. And when you think about
Mhm.
that, that's actually kind of daunting because it's not an unfinished game by any means. I would argue that, despite there being half the amount of temples, the temples that were in this one were incredible. I personally believe, and again, this is one of the biggest Zelda debates of all time, is which is better, Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. I personally like Majora's Mask better. I just love all the masks you can get. There's so much melancholy emotion to it too. When the Zora is dying on the beach and you take his guitar using the mask, and there's a lot of really sad kind of elements in that. And it was very just daunting the whole time you're playing the game that the moon is, obviously going to crash into the planet. So I always thought that it was very just kind of brushed with doom. That it was really doom impending that game felt. It was a really darker kind of approach at Zelda, and I don't think that they really came back to a dark approach like that in Zelda. I know Twilight Princess had a lot of dark elements, but
They didn't do
um,
it. They didn't do it right in Twilight Princess, in my opinion. They just didn't capture the same energy that Majora's Mask had.
I feel like with uh, Twilight Princess, I think that they were on the mark as far as what the game was, but it definitely wasn't as dark. It felt gritty for sure. And it was definitely, I mean, at the time, especially, I think that it was one of the coolest looking links. That he was really, really well done.
Hmm.
But the thing that I really like about Majora's Mask is just that, it was such a great environment. You're in the clock town and every little area, and the people have so much character. And then all of a sudden, you go out into the open world outside. A lot of the quests were really interesting, and it has my favorite villain of all time. And some could even argue that it's not really a villain, but I mean, Skull Kid donning the Majora's Mask is just the look of him, just how he was almost like this jester. He's always kind of taunting Link, when he's on top of the clock tower and when he's on the moon and that sort of thing. I think that they took a lot of really interesting approaches with that game, and I think that they were able to execute it perfectly. And then obviously the shining gem of that game is once you're able to beat the game in the secret alternative way by turning in all the masks and doing the special dungeons, you're rewarded with the Fierce Deity's mask. And I think that Fierce Deity Link is probably one of the coolest character designs I've ever seen. I mean, he's got the iconic sword that kind of crisscrosses into itself. He looks amazing, and it just was just so mind blowing, especially when I was a kid. I just thought that was an incredible route to take it. But obviously, I think people can debate it to the end of time. Ocarina of Time was a banger. Everyone knows this. It's an incredible game. That's the first time we really got a good look, and I'm going to say a good look at Ganondorf, not this pig Ganondorf, which I've never really been a fan of the pig Ganondorf from the past, even though he had a little bit of charm and character. I really liked how they made him this dark wizard from the Gerudo Valley. The idea that there's a male born every so often, and this male was just nasty. He got down to brass tacks with his dark magic, and he actually had one of the pieces of the Triforce, which was very, very cool how they did that.
Yeah,
Um,
some of the aspects of Majora's Mask were just borderline terrifying, honestly. You have the small Link statue with the creepy face that follows you around.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
Ben
they made
Drown, baby.
Yeah, they made creepy pastas out of that. And as well, just the aspect of just each day the music starts to speed up and get a little bit more scary, and even the zombie guy that comes out of that one town. That I remember as a kid playing that part, I was terrified of that particular aspect when that zombie comes out of the closet or
Oh, the
whatever.
dad.
Yeah, that's freaked me the fuck out when I was a kid. So some of the aspects of that game were just borderline just terrifying, and I think they really nailed that.
The vendor, I think he was the creepiest guy, the actual guy who sold
The
the
mask
masks.
salesman.
Yeah, for something about that guy, like I always wondered, like there's got to be more to this character. And after beating the game and everything and completely wrapping it, you find out there's not much more with that character. But I just always felt like I've always felt like that guy was conniving, and there was something up with that sneaky guy. But I'm gonna bring it back to Ocarina Time, just because honestly, for at that time in my life, that was up until that point my favorite game. 100%. I love how, like Carter said, you start out with nothing, literally nothing. You literally just have your little tunic. And you're walking around, going through logs in the Kariko forest, and then you get your wooden shield, and then a little while later, then you get your first wooden sword, and then you just progress through the game. You get different tunics, you get different items that help you. You get the little bombs, and then all of a
The hook
sudden after
shot,
the
the
hook
iron
shot.
boots.
Different boots. Come on, we're new boot goofing now, boys. You get the
Oh
iron
yeah.
boots, you get the float boots. I mean, those boots, I mean, that's one thing that I always loved. I love the idea of putting on the Air Jordans and floating around in the Shadow Temple. I love that. I think that that was such a cool take, taking that inventory from, the top down ones and then just really super expanding on them to the point where it's like, wow, he looks so cool in the red tunic when you're doing the
Fire
Goron
Temple.
parts, and you're doing the blue tunic with the Zora parts. I think that when it comes to Zelda games, I mean, obviously there's new ones that have come out over the years, but the two juggernauts that stand out in my mind is Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time.
And that's exactly what I'm saying, is the fact that it's such a well done game. Like I love how you do the first three temples that aren't even really temples. They are, but they aren't, to get the pieces, and then you all of a sudden you put your sword in the thing and then grab the master sword from the church, and then all of a sudden you come out adult Link with rocking your white pants, you know what I mean? And then you get like a better hook shot, and you get better bombs, and then you still have your different tunics and stuff
And the
like that.
bigger wallet because you're an adult.
Yeah, the adult wallet. Yeah, there's just so much to that game. And also the Bagoron sword. We can't not talk about the Bagoron sword. Like, yeah, the sword that breaks eventually, does the most damage in the game out of any weapon, but it breaks. And which is one thing I kind of didn't like, not to switch topics so fast, but Breath of the Wild. I wasn't a huge fan of how every weapon in that game breaks. So that was kind of a bit of a letdown for me in that aspect. But the thing is with Ocarina of Time, I love the Ocarina itself. You know what I mean? Calling Eponia, and like the Sun Song, and like there's just so many different aspects that you can use that for. And I just think they really fleshed out that game to make it fun for everybody. And obviously it's a fairly linear game. Like you have to do one thing after another, like you have to do the temples in order and everything like that. But I still love how you can still run around and talk to different people and like interact in all sorts of areas without really changing the basic storyline of the game. And that's one thing I love about Majora's Mask, is the fact that you can do anything in any order basically, as far as the getting the masks go. And I think that was the smartest thing they did with that game, is if like collect all the 24 masks or however many there were, and then you unlock the ultimate mask, and that's Fierce Deity. And that first time I ever put on that mask, after me and my brother, because we didn't have YouTube back then, so we had to use the game facts and go through and do all of them. And we didn't have the game facts for the first 6 months the game was out. So I think we were stuck with like 8 masks or something like that. So then having to go back in time every day, like the last 6 hours or whatever, you start getting sketched out. Like Carter said, the music gets faster, everything gets faster. So you're like, okay, let's do the Song of Time and go back to the first day, because this is starting to sketch me out. We're running out of time here. And I just think even going to fight Skull Kid when you're not ready to, when you don't have all the giants yet, it's such a cool vibe, because like there's nothing you can do to win no matter what. It doesn't matter. The only thing that'll save you is that Song of Time. And I just love that aspect of it. Skull Kid was such a well done enemy.
I think that that's really a good distinction between the two. The first of the two on the 64, Ocarina of Time, it had a very linear feel, but it wasn't bad. I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world when a game is linear, especially when executed in that perfect way. There were a few little side quests you can do, definitely, that were really cool, like how you could get the horse at the ranch, and you could do the little side quests, but Majora's Mask was very non-linear, and some of the cool secrets you could do in that, like getting the blue milk that gave you infinite magic, or getting some of these really obscure masks. And the thing that was really cool about the masks is even the ones that didn't transform you into a Goron, a Zora, or a Deku, were actually pretty cool too. Like I liked how the stone mask, when you wore it, people just didn't notice you. That was kind of the idea behind that one. Or like the mask that essentially was the lens of truth from the first one, where you could see invisible or little secrets in that way too. The one thing that I will say though that I think is another very good way to describe how dark this game was, is when you're forced to become the Deku, and just even once you have the ability to take the mask off or put them on, that cinematic that plays when he's being transformed is just, it's just so metal. I love that. I just love how you get a lot of flavor with each one of the racial masks for sure. With the Goron, you're this bulky guy who can rip around as the spin ball, and then you're playing your instruments. It's you got the bongos going, and then the Zoro, you're shredding, and then of course the Deku, you got the trumpets. So I've always thought that was such a rich difference between all of them. They felt different. I just think that Majora's Mask was a piece of art, really. I would say that Ocarina of Time is definitely up there too. But they have their strengths, and it's hard to point out too many weaknesses. I know that some people might disagree with the idea that these are the best games that have ever been conceived. But I'm throwing my hat in the ring with those people. I think that these games are phenomenal. A lot of people try to uh, equate that to the rose tinted glasses, and that people are just looking at it with nostalgia goggles, basically. But I think that if you go back and you give these games a chance, you play them 100% through, you'll be pleasantly surprised how well they stand up. Maybe not graphics wise, but again, that goes into the idea that the 64 only had so much capability. But man, these games are slam dunks.
That's the thing for me. It's like, if I can still go back and get enjoyment out of these games, because I'm one of the people that I literally care about the graphics so much, and it literally can make or break a game for me nowadays. But if I can enjoy the vibes and go back to those games and still love it with every fiber of my being, I just can't really see how other people wouldn't. Like I said, there's just so much progression as your character. Like, I love how you literally start out with no items. You just don't start out with anything, and you're just in the Kariko forest, and then all of a sudden you literally have to progress and progress. So then all of a sudden you have a bunch of items, and different items work in different circumstances, right? And the same could be said with the masks, Majora's Mask. If you don't get the bunny ears, man, you can literally end up spending almost double the time playing that game because you're not able to cruise around as much. Same with getting Eponia. One of the things I remember the most is after you get Eponia and you go back to the ranch, and I can't remember which mask this is for, but you fight the aliens. Remember, on the third day, you have to do everything in exact order, and then you come back and you end up trying to fight the aliens with the light arrows. I just think it was a very, very well done game. I have no complaints with Majora's Mask or Ocarina of Time, especially considering I didn't even know there was an 8-month time crunch. Like, that's insanity. Like, they crushed that game. And as far as I know, it was only the second game to use the expansion pack for N64, that little black cartridge with the red on it. It was like $100 or something like that. It was expensive back at the time. So it just goes to show that Nintendo, they really flesh out their ideas, and they can make games really, really good if they take the time to release them, right?
And if you're someone like Dallas, who his dick really gets hard when he sees these good graphics, you can go back on the 3DS and you can play the updated versions of the game with bug fixes, and it allows you to use the gyro functionality of the 3DS. Yeah, so if you're someone like Dallas, there's those options as well, where the updated graphics.
I think that that's such another important thing too, is when you do a remaster, I think remasters can be really phenomenal. I personally love Final Fantasy 7, but to see them come back with this remake where it looks gorgeous. Very rarely am I a graphics junkie, but that's one time where I gotta join the bench with Dallas when it comes to graphics. I think that Cloud and all the gang look amazing in that. I know that some people have criticized the game for obviously not being as good as or as groundbreaking as the Final Fantasy 7 for the PlayStation, but I do think that they look incredible. And I think it's really good to see when games are remastered and elevated to that level. The one thing I do know that a lot of people over the course of time have complained about with Majora's Mask is the 3-day system, which at surface value, I can see why people don't like that, but I love the 3-day system. There's so many interesting songs that the Scarecrow teaches you. You can speed time up, you can slow it down, you can go back a single day. You can, there's so many different ways you can approach it, and you need to too, because for some of these masks, you need to be at a certain place at a certain time. I mean, one of the ones that sticks out in my mind is when you're trying to help that little blue-haired boy with get the sun mask, and I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that we're going to be able to get to wear that cool mask. But you realize that you don't get to wear that mask. He uses that to propose to someone. But like I say, I think the 3-day system, a lot of people critique it and they don't think it's as good as the linear system from Ocarina of Time. I would argue, I think that the 3-day system is perfectly fine, especially the way they implement it, how you can manipulate it and stuff. The only way, the only thing that really affects the passage of time is when you go back in time, you lose all your rupees. But there's a way around that. You can just put all your rupees in the bank, go back in time, and they're sitting there waiting for you. So all of the negatives about the time travel in the 3-day system are actually really, really well done and really executed. So there's ways around little things like that.
I just don't know where else they would have went with it. It's apparent like your first time that you go to the clock tower to fight Skull Kid, you know what I mean? Like there's no other option. If you couldn't go back to time with the Song of Time, like the game would have been over before it started. Like it was a smart idea to implement something like that. And especially with the actual, like, because it's not as linear, you literally can't really, the playability of it, that's one thing that makes it special, is the fact that you could literally play the Song of Time over and over again and keep going back and collecting more rupees. And like if you miss something in the game with a linear game, if you missed one of those puzzles, like talking to the mailman or talking to the little blue-haired boy where you go down and you do the puzzle or whatever, and you're like have a time limit and stuff like that. If you couldn't go back in time, it'd be one and done. You know what I mean? You'd would have had to save it, and then hopefully you had a save point at that particular time. Otherwise, you'd literally miss the whole game, and then there'd be things you can't get. So, from a completionist standpoint, the game wouldn't have worked.
So moving on to the GameCube, I think that they absolutely smashed expectations with Wind Waker. I think that Wind Waker is another one of those top shelf heavy hitters. If Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are the juggernauts, their little juggernaut son is sitting right on the couch with them, and that's Wind Waker. I think that it was a phenomenal game. I think that the art style was so amazing. I love that cell shaded kind of cartoony look. I think that this game was great. I love the idea. Is it felt like it was very open world, and it had a lot of character, and the whole aspect of a lot of these towns and cities and stuff are out on the open waters, and you're ripping around on the Red Lion King. I thought that was such a cool system. I loved the way you could just traverse with the boat. I like how you could even attempt to fight, Ganon's like giant chicken and that sort of stuff right at the start, and you're going to get smoked because you don't have really that much gear. But I think that Wind Waker was a nice, fresh way to, come back on the GameCube with a really, really great title. I think that Wind Waker is pretty underappreciated. I know that when people think Zelda, they really are talking about Ocarina and Majora's Mask. Those are the big boys, but I think that the medium-sized boy in there with the nice clothes and looking good too is Wind Waker.
I love the cartoony style of Wind Waker, and when I first heard about it, I wasn't very enthused about it. I was like, this might not be as good of a game as I thought it would be. But I just love the explorability. Like that's one thing that knocks all the rest out of the park. Like Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time don't really have anything on the amount of islands that there are in the maps. Like there's like 100 different little places you can go, and I just obviously it's fairly linear as well, but there's so much extra stuff you can do in that game compared to either of the other two. Like comparing that even to Majora's Mask, which is obviously there's a lot more collectibles and extra stuff to do in that game. But I really feel like Wind Waker, it was just honestly, I think I've spent more time playing Wind Waker than probably any other Zelda franchise. it's just, there's just so many places you could do, and like you get attacked just driving in the water. All of a sudden pirates will attack you, or you go on this island and there's a little secret cave and it's completely dark and you can't see anything in it. But the fight sequences, I think the fight sequences in it were really, really well done. I loved the dodging and the jumping, and just like it just felt like a much more smooth combat system. And even on the first island, you had the sword master or whatever, and
I love that.
you had to get so many hits
Mhm.
on him without him hitting you 3 times or whatever, and you could get, and there was like 3 different difficulties of it. I remember the master difficulty or whatever, I think you had to hit him 100 times without him hitting you once. I still never did that. Like, and I was probably 19, 20 years old trying to do it, and I just couldn't do it. And it's just all the extra stuff. Like obviously now with the amount of YouTube and stuff, I haven't even went back to GameCube and played Wind Waker for a long time because I was stuck with Breath of the Wild and uh Twilight, Zelda Twilight or whatever,
Twilight
Twilight
Princess.
Princess.
Twilight Princess. And I just think that Wind Waker was very well done. I definitely didn't, I never wrapped it. I beat it, but I never wrapped it. But I mean, there was just so much to that game. And I'd actually really like to have a little playthrough of that because it was like very, very well done. And like I said, my favorite thing about it was the combat system. I just really liked it. The only thing that I didn't like is, how you had to basically hide from guys. You know what I mean? They had the same thing in both Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, but I didn't like how you'd like get found by a guy with the torch, and then he'd kick you off the castle and you have to start all over again. I was like, that was one of the things, and like hide under jars and stuff like that. That was one of the things that I wasn't a huge fan of. But I mean, I see why they did that. It made sense for the game.
I think it was really cool to see it go from the 64 with their very stylized direction to the cartoony side. And then come the Wii, we have Twilight Princess, where now this is a gritty version. It looks great. You know, Link almost has the chainmail going on. The design was great. I think that Twilight Princess is a great game. You know, a standalone game, especially if it wasn't in the franchise of Zelda. I think that it'd be a great game. I do think it falls a little bit short in a lot of aspects. Some of the equipment just felt, not very, I guess, not very. It doesn't give you a lot of different ways of utilizing it. For example, the one Beyblade that could spin up the side of the zipper walls, you really just used it for that. The double grapple hook, you couldn't sling around like Spider-Man. You'd have to wait until the other one connected. So I feel like it missed the mark on a lot of the creativity. I think that a lot of the different armor sets and tunics look really good. I think that the Zora tunic, the blue one, looked really cool in the way the Zora's heads are really long, and the way the armor is like, yeah, that's what their armor would look like. I really liked how they did that stylistically. And then of course you have the magic armor that drains rupees and you take no damage. I thought that was interesting, but it's also kind of disappointing to see your wallet kind of deplete as you're playing. You only want to use that in really special occasions.
Just to correct you, Twilight Princess was actually originally released on the GameCube, and then it came out on the Wii after that. But yeah, I agree. Twilight Princess kind of, in the more recent Zelda games, Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess, I never ended up actually completing those games. I found myself getting stuck at a certain point, and then I would kind of just lose interest in the game, especially with Skyward Sword. I
Oh,
think I think that game kind of really missed the mark. You know, they tried to bring the motion controls in, which I think is a cool idea. And if you guys have ever played some of the Wii U games, Nintendo Land, they had a Zelda mini game where you swing the Wii remote around and it feels really good to kill the bokoblins or whatever. But I think they could have definitely improved upon the actual gyro or motion controls, sorry, for the Wii. I think that would have been a really cool aspect, but they really kind of failed in that department. And Skyward Sword itself was just, I know a lot of people look at that as kind of one of the weaker Zelda games.
I would argue it's probably the weakest Zelda game. And I'm not even including some of the more odder choices, especially they did with the Game Boys. But I mean, odd can be great sometimes. You know, the Game Boy, like I know Oracle of Seasons and Ages were both bangers. These were
Yeah,
great
they
Game
were.
Boy games. I think that those are two of the really really good ones for the handheld for sure. But Skyward Sword, it just didn't do it for me. I didn't like the look of Link in it. It was almost like a blend of Twilight Princess meets Wind Waker, which I thought was really awkward. Um, a lot of the characters, they really looked like they're all made out of kind of plasticine. I didn't really like the aesthetic of it. The combat looked awful, like especially the stuff you had to use the Wii remote for. It was just really stiff, really bad. And it didn't really have a lot of interesting, cool boss fights. I think that, you know, when you think Zelda games, you think really awesome dungeons, really awesome boss fights, and that's something that I think Ocarina and Majora's Mask obviously did great. I think Wind Waker was cool in a sense as well, as far as how they did that, but it felt the temples or the dungeons felt really kind of a far cry from what they were in the predecessors. But I think Skyward Sword really dropped the ball with that one. And I think it was just really disappointing in general.
That's one thing I will say is Wind Waker, it was an amazing game and I love the combat system, but the bosses in general, they it's hard to compete when you had the 7 temples in Ocarina of Time and then the 4 temples in Majora's Mask. Like I remember the Giant's Mask where you fought the last boss in the Stone Temple and it was
Twin mold.
I think it was the only time you could use no, you could use the Giant's Mask, I'm pretty sure, in all 4 of the temples.
That giant bull boss too in that room. That's just the scale of that boss was so incredible to see as a kid. Just that giant bull just running around and fucking just
Oh,
sprinting after
that
you.
actually reminds me too. You could fight the jungle temple, my favorite
Mhm.
temple in the game, where he's that kind of giant Aztec warrior who would sing and dance, and then he'd strike you with the sword. You can use the Giant's Mask, and now you're on his level, and it was really cool to see that.
You could use
Um,
it on every temple.
yeah,
You could only use it 4 times in the whole game, which kind of to me defeated the purpose of it a little bit, but it was still cool to go back in the old temples and be able to actually fight the last boss on their level when you're just as big, you know what I mean? It was pretty cool idea.
I think it would have been really cool as well to be able to use the Giant's Mask, especially outside of Clocktown. But I can understand why that would be a little bit hard to kind of balance around. You're this gigantic Link stomping around. But I love that mask, and I love kind of the niche purpose where you could go back and fight these bosses. But I mean, I feel like I'm just gushing about Majora's Mask at this point. But another thing I really liked about the temples in Majora's Mask is the little fairies you could collect. If you collected all the fairies in all the temples, you could turn them in for the Great Fairy Sword. And I think I love secret collectibles like that. And they also did your main sword kind of chain quest where you would get the razor sword. And if you got the gold powder, you can turn it into the gilded sword. So
Yeah.
I really thought they were really, it kind of felt like a tip of the hat, like almost an homage to the
Ocarina
Bagoran
of
sword.
Time. Yeah,
So I
exactly.
like, but although the Bagoran Swords chain quest was like pretty extensive,
Mhm.
but like I say, so next coming out of the gate, after Skyward Sword, I believe was Breath of the Wild for the Switch, if I'm not mistaken.
I just want to touch really quickly on Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. So a lot of people had a lot of hate for those games. But I personally loved being Link and be able to swing my sword and have my shield with the nunchuck and be able to swing my sword. Like there was just something about it. Obviously, after like 2 days, I had to switch to my classic controller because my arm was getting tired from swinging the sword around so much. But I think that was the thing about the Wii that kind of really broke the niche and broke the mold for other systems is the fact that you finally it's like almost like VR compared to nowadays, you know what I mean? Like you're in the game, you're the one swinging Link's sword, you're the one blocking, rolling and freaking slashing. And yeah, I just remember how much physical activity I got out of the Wii in general, not just from obviously Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, but pretty much every Wii game that there was. It was just a lot of physical activities, which is one thing that I have to shout out that for.
Another thing, right before we jump into Breath of the Wild, even though I'd love to talk about that game, is just the music and Zelda in
Oh,
general. I'd say it's on par, if not a little bit even more, even better than some of the Mario music. But Nintendo always kills it in the music department. Some of the Zelda music is some of the most memorable music of all time. Some of the ones I can think of off the top of my head, the Gerudo Valley song, the Lost Woods song, or even just you know, that guy in Majora's Mask that's going like this, that song, just some of the music is so memorable in the Zelda games.
Even the songs on the Ocarina, on the actual Ocarina that you play, like the Eponia song, the Song of Time, like Sun Song, like they're all like they're really catchy. You know what I mean? And
And
they can
who
really
could
get you.
forget the Song of Storms? I think that that's
Oh
probably one
yeah.
of my favorite ones. The music box guy is getting his groove on, and he's picking up the pace as the song kind of kicks in. I gotta just absolutely kind of agree with Carter on that. I think that the Zelda franchise encapsulates some of the most gorgeously composed music. And this even goes back to some of the stuff on the SNES and Nintendo Entertainment System, the first one. I think these tracks are straight up bangers. These are phenomenal tracks, and they're so memorable. I think that as the series progressed, definitely with the GameCube and the Wii, and then obviously the current iteration that we're on with the Switch, the music was still pretty good, but I would say that it's not quite as memorable as the ones for the 64 or even the earlier Nintendo systems. But again, I think that everyone can agree these are some of the most beloved music compositions in any franchise.
I wonder if there's any, like, I haven't really looked into it recently, but if there's another another Zelda game on the horizon, because like Breath of the
I
Wild,
believe they're
Breath of the
doing
Wild too.
yeah, they're doing a sequel to Breath of the Wild, which I'm really excited for.
I am excited for it, but at the same time, the whole breakable weapons thing, it really, it just pains me to have to go back and keep getting the same weapon and like, or a weapon that's like two upgrade points higher in damage than your other weapon. And then certain boss fights or certain like big bads, you end up having to switch your weapon because you break it mid combat, and then you realize, oh, I run out of all six of my strongest weapons, so now I'm using this weapon that does like a quarter of the damage. It was just always very frustrating for me. It seemed, don't get me wrong, I like grindy games. You guys know how much I love MMOs and how much I love RPGs in general, so I'm used to the grind. I'm just not used to the grind of having to go back and collect the exact same thing that I already had just so I could do the next boss. It's, I don't know. I love Breath of the Wild. Don't get me wrong. Like the Master Sword quest, and I love the whole recharge system of the Master Sword. How it'll break eventually, and then you've just got to wait 20 minutes or whatever, and you'll get it back again, and it's still one of the strongest weapons in the game. But I just still the breakable weapon. I hope maybe they'll do something with that. Obviously, a lot of people don't complain about it like I do, but that was a big turn off for me.
I personally love that aspect of the game. It made it feel a lot different than other Zelda games. It kind of felt like they were returning to their roots, kind of similar to the first Zelda game where you start off and you kind of can go wherever you want. You're in this big world and you can kind of just go around. It felt more like a survival game in a way, and I really love the approach they took with Breath of the Wild. And for someone like you, I'm surprised because I know you love getting upgrades and equipment and armor and things like that. So I would have thought that you would have loved that aspect of the game. So that's a little surprising to me, but I love the different armor sets you can find, the different weapons. There's just so much variety in all the different weapons and shields and armor that you could get in that game. And it just felt so amazing, just the open world aspect where you could go and do whatever you want. You could even start the game and go straight to fight Ganondorf if you want.
Yep,
Speed
that's
runs where
crazy.
where you can literally just go have the beginning sword, first 3 hearts, and then they just go beat Ganon at the very beginning of the game.
I vividly remember even getting that game. I know that my partner had such a great time with that game. She was loving it. And I think that what's really so impressive about Breath of the Wild compared to all of the other Zelda games is just the variety in which you can approach things. I've seen videos of people doing the most complex, different game breaking kind of strategies of like take on some of these guardians and stuff, with the whole you can parry their laser and stuff. There's also just a lot of really cool combos you can do, and there's a lot of variety as far as the equipment you get. The one thing I thought was really cool too is just like how Carter said, it's this open world environment where you could approach things at your leisure and when you want to do it. They implemented a lot of really new and fresh ideas that they'd never done in other Zelda games, like the climbing mechanic. I also really liked the way they did secrets in that, because it's really, really, I would say, in my opinion, it's sometimes hard to execute secrets in an open world. Sometimes it just feels like an endless grind of looking under every rock. But I think it was really cool how they did it with the little leaf people, and you'd be rewarded with their little poops. I thought that those were so cool. You put the stones in a certain way in a circle, and you're rewarded for that kind of adventure and that sort of stuff. I personally think that open world games can somewhat get a little played out. I don't really enjoy them that much. I've always kind of had the attitude that, like, when games are smaller, you can actually get a lot more of a kind of flavor and feel for that. Like, I feel like Majora's Mask, and especially Ocarina of Time, especially when you're in the capital cities and stuff, it's so rich and vibrant. It feels like it's humming with activity, and every character has their own little, their little nuance and their little quirks and stuff. I really like that. Little subtle things too, like how I believe in both games, if I'm not mistaken, but for sure in Majora's Mask, how you could go upstairs in one of the hotels and the guy actually fell in the toilet and he's just a hand and he needs toilet paper. Yeah, I've always just thought that was such a cool thing. Just little things like that. Obviously, this game is not as ambitious as Cyberpunk with how great that game turned out. But you could even see the mailman, like, he's actually doing his route. So long before the days of Cyberpunk promising its fan base that every NPC is living his own life, that mailman was doing it right too the whole time. So
And he wasn't glitching out doing it, which was super sweet too. But the thing with Breath of the Wild is I like the cooking mechanic. I like how you could eat food and you could do more damage and you could get hearts. You could eat certain food that gives you like as long as you had your base 10 hearts, you could eat food that'll give you all the 20 hearts. And I thought that was pretty cool having yellow health, the yellow hearts instead of red hearts. And you could literally just make sure you always ate the food. So then you'd always have that buff and you could literally just grind for the food. So you'd literally basically, like, even starting out at the game, it'd be like you're almost done the game because of how many hearts you have. So you don't have to worry about taking as much damage and stuff like that. I thought that was cool. And don't get me wrong, it's hard for me because I love the grind fest of Zelda. And I love how you can get all the different weapons and how you can like two-handers and like there's axes, swords, like, and they all feel different when you're using them. I love that aspect, but I just wish there was a way that you could not have your weapon completely just disappear. You know what I mean? It would be nice if there was a rupee system, how you could literally take like 100 rupees or even more and just and get that weapon back, or something like that, where it's not just broken and done, throw it out of your inventory and then take 6-7 hours to find another boosted weapon like that. That was my biggest problem with it.
yeah, I can definitely see that for sure. But I think that there's almost a little bit of charm when they try to do different things. I always have to give Nintendo a little bit of credit for that. As far as pushing the envelope of creativity, I think Legend of Zelda really encapsulates that, and it's nice to see that they're at least trying different stuff. You know what I mean? So like I say, the breakable weapon system was definitely a flaw, and it felt like it almost didn't fit the game, so to speak, because you'd be in the middle of a really complex fight, and all of a sudden, this sword that I was using or this axe that I was using is now just broken. Now you have to switch. I don't have any backups. So now you're kind of running around like a dingling waiting for the Master Sword to recharge. But yeah, like I say, I think that I can understand the appeal and I can understand why Breath of the Wild was so popular. I think it was a really, really well executed game. And I'm going to, and this is something that, I think that a lot of people can agree with for sure. But I'm just not a very big fan of open world games. I like it when a game has a lot of character with this small environment. Because if you really think about it, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, if we're just talking about scale, the areas that which you can explore are all pretty close together and they're not very big. Like the whole of Hyrule Field is not that big, but it felt so big at the time. Maybe that might have to do with just oversaturation within the market and all these open world games, and everyone's trying to, perfectly render these environments. But I feel like there's a lot of charm in small areas. You can pack a lot of character in some of these small towns and stuff like that.
That's a good point. That's always the biggest flaw with open world games, is there's areas where it just feels kind of empty. And Breath of the Wild definitely had that issue where there's just large, vast areas that just aren't really filled with much at all. So I definitely think that that issue definitely comes to fruition in a lot of open world games. I can think of Skyrim, games, they're trying to always may have the biggest map or whatever, but I think that might end up being detrimental to games, where I feel like it's better to have a smaller map with more in it than just a big, wide, empty map of nothingness.
No Man's Sky comes to mind. Well,
Yeah.
especially on its release for sure. But like I say, I mean, he's the classic green guy. We all love him. It's Link, you know, he's great. And it's really nice to see that you know, he's made a couple appearances in some great games like Smash Bros and that sort of thing, and Mario Kart for sure. But I think that one thing that we can all agree on is that the story and the creative kind of fantasy world that they've created is just phenomenal. I love the idea of the Zoras and the Gorons and the Deku kids and just the fairy kids in general, like how they all live in the forest. And the first temple in Ocarina of Time is you climb into this giant great tree, and he's a dying tree. I think that just the way they tell the story is great too, and there's no, especially for the 64 ones, there's very limited audio as far as like the conversations going on. There's not a lot of like spoken dialogue. You'll obviously hear Link kind of screaming around when he's swinging the sword and breaking pots, but that's really all we're getting. We're reading the text, so you kind of have to fill in the blanks as far as how they would sound and that sort of thing. But you know, I think that each game has a very distinct feel. I think Ocarina had a very kind of adventure, like kind of this gallant event that's going on, and you got to defeat evil. It felt really like a heroic game. And then you have Majora's Mask, where it felt very melancholy, very dark and macabre. Like it had a lot of like really, really you know, dark elements, kind of how you said with when the little girl's dad's in the closet, and also with the moon, it's got that look on its face. I was blown away with the moon when
It's
I
in the
first saw it.
picture. Yeah, it's nuts. It's like, what the
Like I
heck?
absolutely love that scowl, and he's coming to crash his face into the town. I just think that that's so cool. And then later in some of the games as well, you know, you have a mix of Wind Waker with the cartoony kind of cell shaded vibe, which I think a lot of people appreciated that too, because it was very different than what we're used to. And then Twilight, when they reeled it back into that kind of gritty, dark, lots of gray tones and lots of very kind of faded out color contrasts and that sort of thing. So I think that, you know, I would think that some people would agree when I say that some of the Zelda games are better than others, but I think that each one is kind of redeemable in its own way.
I agree. Majora's Mask, the thing that I could think about right as soon as you mentioned the moons is the four giants holding up the moon and just like stopping it from, so that's the only thing that gives you the time to fight Majora, you know what I mean? And like I remember trying to fight Majora after every temple, and then the the one giant's just not enough. Neither is two or three, and it takes all four of the giants to finally give you enough time to defeat Majora and then head to the moon to fight him. But obviously, there's things with Breath of the Wild that I like, and I know Carter's kind of in the middle, and you're not a huge fan of open world games, but I really like the open world vibe. And like obviously there was a little bit of bare space in Breath of the Wild, but it was cool how you could climb around and you had a stamina bar, and you couldn't, at the beginning of the game, you couldn't climb up everything because you'd run out. And then later on, you find stamina food so that you could climb to the highest peaks. And then you had to decide whether you wanted to put your points into hearts or stamina. Like I also thought that was cool. There was a lot of things that Breath of the Wild did really well. And I actually didn't know they were doing a Breath of the Wild too. So that's actually super exciting for me. I'll get to do some research on that after this podcast. But it's just nice to know that they're always trying different things with Zelda. Like we talked about Mario earlier, how they were always like adding new mechanics and stuff like that into it. But with Zelda, they all seem like completely different games, all in the same universe. But like you said, you had the top-down view, and then you had the 2D side scroller, and then you had the 3D. Obviously, obviously Ocarina of Time and Majora Mask were very similar in that aspect, but you also had in Majora's Mask the transforming. Like I love transforming into a Dooku and like going in the flower and shooting myself up and flying around all over the place. And then the Goron, like holding up and being able to get spikes on your back and just cruising around and just taking enemies out. Like that was sick. Same with the Zora, flipping around, throwing his freaking little batarang, whatever you call them, fish hooks or whatever. Like it was just
Fins.
yeah, fins. Yeah,
His swimming was really cool too, and when you were swimming, you
fast.
could shock around your body. I really thought that was cool too. I would say that like gameplay aside, and if we're just talking about lore wise, I think it's really, really interesting. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with this, but Nintendo at one point released an official timeline, and you can kind of see how the games actually fit into place, because Majora's Mask actually doesn't make a lot of sense thematically with the lore, because he's obviously going on this grand adventure, but as you know, in Ocarina of Time, he was sleeping in the sage's realm until he was an adult. So it's really cool to see. And I don't even think Ganondorf is in Majora's Mask at all. So it's just really cool to see how the timelines work and which games actually came first, because what you discover in Wind Waker is that not every Link is the same. These are green heroes of destiny. I know that there was already a Link of Legend that the Wind Waker Link dons his uniform, so it's not the same person. And I've always thought that's such a cool concept, because I've always thought when I was younger, like, oh, this is Link, but in a different kind of dimension. It's like, nope, they're not all the same guy. I've always thought that was such a cool idea.
I'm really curious. So how did that work? Obviously, you're more familiar with it than us. So when he used Majora, it's the same link, but it's just when he was
I
sleeping.
believe canonically, after the events of Ocarina Time take place, when Link returns to his kid form, then the events of Majora's Mask take place.
Which, when you think about it, it doesn't really make much sense,
Mhm.
because he starts the game in his treehouse with like no gear or no experience, even though it's like he just came back from summoning giants and using the giant's mask and becoming Fierce Deity. It kind of gets a little confusing. I think the way they explained it on the Nintendo timeline is Link from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are technically the same guy, but they take place in Majora's Mask anyway. It takes place in kind of like a tangent of time, or a side thing. I know a lot of people speculated that maybe in the time between being a child and becoming adult Link, he was off doing his own adventures, but they kind of put the kibosh on that. So, and then just there's a lot of really odd time ones too, especially with the Minish Cap and a lot of stuff like that. But it's just like, if you guys haven't ever seen the Zelda Nintendo timeline, I think it's a really cool to check it out and kind of put the pieces together. It's kind of fun.
I'd love to do that. I'm like I said, I'm a huge fan of Zelda. I hope that they obviously, was it Link's Awakening? Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the one that was remastered? Which was the one that was just remastered like
Link's
recently?
Awakening, I believe.
Link's Awakening. Yeah, I'm gonna have to get that game. I played it at a friend's house, so obviously I don't have the hard copy of it. But that would be really interesting to play, because I'm pretty sure that was one of the first few Zelda games that was ever released. So it's really cool that they went back on the Switch and like basically remastered it, right? I like how they were starting to remaster some of these games. Like if they were to remaster Majora's Mask or Ocarina of Time, I think it would be amazing. Just like, especially with the technology they have now.
They,
Maybe
they
not on
did
this
do they
console.
did do a soft remaster with
The
Ocarina.
3DS
Yeah,
games.
they did a soft remaster where the graphics look like, I would say, like it's obviously a stylized kind of graphic, because they're not pushing the boundaries of the hardware, but it looks really good and really, really smooth, opposed to like the Link with the super pointy polygon nose and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
but like I say, I mean, you know the remasters are where it can get really, really interesting. I think that this one remaster, in my opinion, I don't think it really met my expectations. I know that I bought that for my girlfriend's birthday, and she liked the game, but I just feel like it fell a little flat. It had this kind of mobile city feel, like the aesthetic, like it looked almost like he was made of Lego. His hair was this fixed kind of Lego hair. It was a kind of an odd appearance, and I think it looked really good. I think they executed it well, but it wasn't my style. It felt very, very kiddie, very childy. So it wasn't really up my aisle, but I definitely can appreciate them trying to remaster that game, because it is a classic, and it's nice to see a classic kind of comes back. The one thing I will say, because I don't believe that it was the one with the purple hair, but I would love for them to come back with a remaster with the purple haired Link. I think that that's such a cool Link. He's never really had purple hair before other than that one, and I just love to see how they could do something with that Link.
I don't know if you guys have ever actually read, but they have a Zelda manga series, which I used to read when I was a little bit younger, and I think just those books in general were really cool. Just to see kind of Zelda and kind of almost an anime kind of manga style was really interesting, and just to see how they would expand on the stories of the game. and add more aspects to the games. I really loved those books growing up, and I wish I still had them, but something they got lost somewhere along the lines. But I really love the Zelda comics or manga series that they did.
Yeah, they did some cool things with Zelda over the past. Like I'm curious how many titles there actually are with Zelda. But I remember even the four Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, like those are really well done games. Like I think it was Game Boy Advanced, if I'm correct, Catlin.
Yes, and what was really cool is they're actually for the Game Boy, but if you play the cartridges on the Game Boy Advance, you would access a secret house. It's like, thanks for playing this on the Advance. Here's a special ring. And I thought that that was a really cool mechanic, which I would love to see them really like build upon in a new release, or even maybe in Breath of the Wild 2, where this game had hundreds of rings that you could put on and they give you different abilities and stuff. I think that there was such a awesome cast of your sidekicks. You could have the kangaroo guy who had the boxing gloves. You could ride the dinosaur over small little terrain. The dragon could swim a little bit. I think Ages and Seasons were phenomenal, and we got to see two big bads that we've never seen before. One of them was the sexy witch, and the other one was the giant iron soldier. So I always thought that those games were really super well executed. The music was great, and I liked that model of Link, that sprite. He kind of had that kind of really streamlined to like a hat and stuff. So like I say, if we're just excluding Skyward Sword, I think that I can't think of a single bad game that they've released, because Skyward Sword was an absolute dumpster fire. I can't believe that that got greenlit, and it's unfortunate that it made it to the market, because other than Skyward Sword, I think they would have had an impeccable record. But much like your favorite band, I'm sure they had a couple stinker albums. So it was they obviously went for it, and they probably shouldn't have, but you got to give them props.
It wasn't a hit by any means, but I actually enjoyed Skyward Sword. Obviously, I don't hold it up to the same heights as Majora's Mask or even Link's Awakening for that matter. But I definitely found its place in my heart. Like it was just nice. Like I really liked the whole idea of the Wii being able to like swing your sword and roll away and stuff. The combat to me wasn't even as good as Twilight Princess actually, but it was just nice to have another game basically for the Wii as far as Zelda goes, because Zelda's one of my favorite titles personally for the Nintendo period. So it is nice to see at least try it out. Like it definitely wouldn't have playability. Like I wouldn't go back and play it now, but I mean at the time when it was first released, I'd had some fun with it. I don't even think I beat it. I think I got done 3 temples, but it was definitely I played hours into it. So I mean that's what games are for, right? To spend time with.
It's a
One
it's a
one
phenomenal
obscure
franchise.
one obscure Zelda game that I enjoyed playing when I was a bit younger was the Four Swords game.
That's
And
a good one.
yeah, I remember they had a version of the Four Swords on the 3DS where if you had multiple 3DSs or if your buddy had a 3DS, you could play four different links all in the same world. So me and my buddies, we would get our 3DSs together and we'd play Four Swords and just run around as these different colored links. And I just have a lot of memories of playing that game.
That's a
That's a
really
good
cool
one too.
idea. I totally forgot.
I think that as far as like just some of the coolest sequences in gaming too, for me especially, that really just kind of just blew my mind of is just how cool. I think the Zelda games had a lot of sequences I think were just dripping in coolness. I remember one of the ones off the top of my head is when you enter the water temple and you fight Dark Link and you go to stab him and he's like he's standing on your sword like, nice try, buddy. Like you can't get me with that. I think that the whole idea of Dark Link, it's this like shadow mirror version of yourself, was so cool at the time. I had never seen anything like that before. Another one that comes to mind is when you actually go to the moon to engage with Skull Kid, and well, I don't even know if it's Skull Kid. I think it's actually just Majora on the moon.
Mhm.
But you go to the moon, and all of a sudden it's this open field with a giant tree, and there's these like really weird kids who all are donning the boss mask. I just thought that was so visually striking and so strange that like now we're on the moon, but we're in this like massive, like green field. It was just so cool. They really pushed the boundaries when it comes to creative, sequences like that. And I think that, these are top shelf games. I don't think anyone can deny that there's a reason why people absolutely love the franchise.
And they love different phases of boss fights. I know for the majority of the Zelda games, in the final boss fight, you have multiple phases. You know, in Ocarina of Time, you had fighting Ganondorf where you play in volleyball, and then you fight Pig Ganondorf where you have to roll under his legs and attack him from behind. But it always seemed like they had multiple phases of boss fights. Even in Majora's Mask, you know, Majora had multiple phases. The first one where he has the eyeball sticking off his head and he's running around with the skinny limbs, and then you have the tentacle Majora mask. I just love how they always implement different phases into the boss fights. And even in Breath of the Wild, you have that first boss fight against the kind of spider Ganon, and then he turns into that massive boar kind of version of Ganondorf. I always love massive scale boss fights, and I think Breath of the Wild was kind of the pinnacle of that, where it's just a boss on such a massive scale.
Well, I think that when it comes to the real OG homie of colossal fights is Shadow of the Colossus. I'm not sure if you ever played those
Oh yeah,
games.
I've never played them, but I've seen a lot of videos, and
They
I love the massive scale in those types of
It
games.
kind of reminds me a little bit of Breath of the Wild, actually, just with how the climbing mechanic was. And these are very strange games when you look at them at surface value. Like, you know, climbing these massive bosses. I mean, that was half the battle, was really just trying to traverse these colossal monsters. So it's very strange. It doesn't feel like a normal kind of hack and slash sword game. It kind of feels like a on the go kind of live puzzle that you're trying to traverse. But one thing I will say about you know, just the Zelda franchise in general is they had a really lot of really cool boss fights, and like you say, a lot of the phases. I know there was a less popular version. I believe it was for the handheld or the Switch. I can't remember, but you can go to low rule, and you're kind of a 2D on the wall Zelda, where you can kind of become like a painting. And one of the boss fights, you can actually, as you're fighting him, you can become a painting on his shield, and then he doesn't know where you went. I think there's a lot of really cool boss fights like that, and they're just so memorable, you know. And I think everyone can remember too, like despite the water temple kind of being kind of just a massive amount of contention for a lot of people. I love that the fish boss that you're fighting in Majora's Mask when he's jumping over you Free Willy style, and I just love the water fights in general. I think the water tempo was better, in my opinion, with Majora's Mask, just because of you could now be the Zora and traverse it in a really interesting way and go through the pipes and swim really different. The one in Ocarina felt like you were melting a lot of ice, you're letting the levels go up. It was kind of just seemed like a time sink. But you know, like I say, I think that the mechanics in these games are really fun and interesting, and the boss fights are really fun and interesting.
I just love the fact that the boss fights are so memorable. Like I remember fighting Ganon for the first time, and it was just that it was an amazing thing. I remember not being able to figure out like what to do. I was literally stuck on him for a while. I had to have a friend come over and help me beat it because I didn't know what to do when he'd shoot the ball at me and you'd have to reflect it back with your sword. I didn't know that, right? And then you'd have to hit him with a light arrow or whatever. It's just like it's the memorabilia is for me what's so important. And I think Breath of the Wild 2, if they just tweak a few things, I think they could be amazing games. But it's just difficult for me because with those games, I hate the fact that the items break. So if they change the items breaking, I think I could literally wrap it completely
We
100%
get that you don't
completionist.
like the items
I know,
breaking.
I'm sorry. I just have to Nintendo. Don't let the items break, please. I'm asking you. Hopefully
I
they
guarantee that aspect is going to come back in the sequel. So
whatever
That'd
guy
be
can
cool.
hope.
That would be cool if now your armor can break and now your boots
yeah,
can break. So I think that's
your
great.
sword breaks in one hit, so you have to just kind of run
One
around.
shout out that I will do. I know this is a bit obscure, but one shout out that I got to give. One of the coolest villains of all time in the Zelda franchise is Phantom Ganon, with
Absolutely.
the portraits, and he's riding through. I remember I had a Phantom Ganon wallpaper on my desktop on my computer for the longest time, and that's just going to be one of my shout outs. I think that that's my favorite boss in the entire franchise. I don't know about you guys, but
I have to bring it to Ganondorf. Like he's OG. Any game where it's actually human form Ganon to me is thug life. Like that's as OG
except
as
for
you can
Wind
get.
Waker, surprisingly, I
You
think the
didn't
Wind
like you didn't like the
I,
chubby.
I liked I liked the final Wind Waker boss fight
I
against
like how he
Ganondorf.
was
I love
dual
how
wielding
you
the blades.
jump and stab him through the head. It was like so weird that you know, you have such a cartoony game, but then such a violent ending as you just stab Ganondorf in the fucking
I
forehead.
think the fight was cool, but I hated his design. I hated how he's kind of this portly Ganon. I love to have the Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time where he's tall and juiced. I just love
Mhm.
that Ganon. He's the one that we got in Smash Bros. Ultimate.
Mhm.
That's my favorite iteration of Ganon. I think
I agree.
you can get this pig stuff out of my face. You can get this little portly Ganon out of my face, and in a lot of aspects, you can get him being a a pig monster like in Twilight Princess. Even though I did like his design in Twilight Princess, he
Mhm.
kind of had the weird cornrows in the crown, and he had the really cool armor. Despite when he was in Brawl looking like that, that was another story. Although he looked cool, he moved like a 40-year-old man with the brisk jog. They completely gutted him in Brawl compared to his iteration of Melee. I just love that Melee, the sound. He's such an iconic villain, and I think that it really goes to show that the boy holding the Triforce of Power gets it done.
Yeah, basically that's gonna be it, guys, for this episode. We really appreciate all your support, and we hopefully you tune in for the next episodes, guys. We got a lot on the burner, and we are excited to be able to share it with you guys. So anyway, it's Dallas, Catlin, and Carter. You guys have a great day. Peace.
See ya.